On the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle. Hope everybody out there's having themselves a great day. This attempted coup, this thing that's going to happen coming up in November and then onward, is being set up now. But what's really interesting about how this is being set up is they've got us arguing with each other on very binary terms. Meanwhile, the actual issue is hiding in the middle and is going to happen, and no one's really talking about it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to discuss the binary portions just to make sure we get that clearly discussed, because there is a lot of question, there is a lot of confusion, there's words being used that actually mean different things. We're going to explain all of that, hopefully give some context to what I'm talking about. And we're going to give some examples where voting by mail has actually benefited one side or the other, but no matter what, there's a lot of cases where it's not benefiting many people. Now, are the percentages huge? No, 2, 3, 4, 5%, 1%. Definitely not astronomical numbers, but we're talking in the millions overall, which to me, if I'm one of those millions that my vote didn't get counted, and me being kind of the way I am in my head, and I'm going to jump to a conspiracy theory, I'm likely going to believe that something malicious happened with my vote, right? It creates that sort of weirdness that we don't need. So that whole concept's being brought in. And then again, what is actually going to happen, and what are they truly trying to do to use this to take control of the country? The answer is probably a little different than a lot of us are initially jumping to. Now let's get into voting outside the polling place. I'm using finger quotes, outside the polling place, because obviously normal voting, go into the polling place, do the little voter machine, bada bing, bada boom, your vote is done, it's broadcast, it's counted almost immediately. Like, there's a lot of good things about it, but you know your vote counted. You get some sort of little notification, and then you get your little sticker, and everything's wonderful. Now, this is still going to exist in a lot of places like it already has, but because of COVID, they're obviously talking about other avenues. Now, again, I'm not saying right or wrong on any of this. I'm trying to provide as much info as I can. Then towards the end of this, I'm going to get into my opinions. But absentee voting, also known as voting by mail, by the way. Absentee ballots have been done for years and years and years. Absentee ballots are a little tricky to get. You've got to, request them. You send in a little notification to the state. The state's like, oh, you want to do an absentee ballot? Okay. Some states require an excuse. Some states don't. Doesn't matter. You're still asking for an absentee ballot. That absentee ballot is then sent to you. You must fill it out. You must do a couple things. Sign it. Put your address. Bada boom, bada bing. Send it back. You've now voted. You don't know necessarily that it got there. You don't know if it's been counted, but that's an absentee ballot. Technically, voting by mail. Now, again, a lot of people are like, we've been voting by mail forever. No, we've been doing absentee ballots forever. Yes, there are some states that have been doing vote by mail for a number of years. Probably won't be too surprised. 4 of those happen to be heavy, gnarly Dem states. One of them, heavy Republican, but it's the weird Republican state, Utah, right? So I don't know. Hey, no offense to anyone. I've had a lot of good friends that are Mormon, but again, it's a Romney state. I don't know what's going on out there. Romney's the one guy that votes against the president, so obviously kind of some action going on. All mail-in voting, though, that's different. That's where they literally go, okay, we got an address. We know there's a person there. They should be of voting age. We're going to send them a ballot in the mail. Don't care who's there. Don't care who gets it. Don't care who votes. That's what scares a lot of people on this. And it should scare people on both sides. But you are basically saying, I don't care if you are legal. I don't care if you're a citizen. I don't care if you're old enough. I don't care. I want you to vote. Now, there's a thought that that'll benefit the Democrats, but then there's also some thoughts that older people tend to like to vote by mail, so that might bump the GOP numbers, because typically older people tend to vote more conservative. Not in my family for some strange reason, but yeah, that's kind of how that works. So there's a lot of discussion around mail-in voting. Mail-in voting and absentee voting, I think, are different things, but they are both technically voting by mail. Now, because of COVID, we've got a lot of states that are going to this mail-in voting concept. Now, to my understanding, there's 5 states that have been doing it for eons. Oregon's been doing it since 2000, right? And we have a story coming up here that kind of talks about that a little bit. But, they got 20 years, right? They got the kinks worked out. But we got a lot of states over here that have changed their deadline extensions. We've got eligibility expansions, meaning more people are eligible for mail-in absentee ballots, right? You got automatic mail-in ballot applications, which means they're just getting automatically sent out to everybody. That's the true mail by vote or vote by mail concept. That's not absentee, that's the automatic ones. And then also we've got some more automatic mail-in ballots. I don't know what the difference between the applications. I'm sorry. They're automatically sending in mail-in ballot applications to a lot of people. You must still fill that out and then send it back. Again, that's probably easier to take advantage of maybe than having to go vote in person or having to do an actual absentee ballot. So again, a lot of states are looking at this. Obviously, people are scared because of COVID. So, all right, so that's what's kind of being looked at. Now, per the 2018 election, the most current election, the one that was, right? Right now, 1 in 4 votes were cast by mail. So not really that many votes were cast by mail back in 2018. 1/4 of them, though. And again, by mail, which meant of the 5 states, that's a huge chunk of the by mail number. So you had 5 states that have been doing this for a number of years, Washington, Oregon, and some Utah and 2 others. And they've been doing this for a long time. So a big chunk of that quarter is those 5 states that are decent populations. So this is absentee voting, though, for the rest of everybody else. So you got 5 states vote by mail totally across the board. And then you've got the rest of these states that do absentee ballots. Those are all considered vote by mail. So again, even looking at all those numbers, only 25% of all votes currently have been done by mail, at least as of 2018. So how does vote by mail work, and does it increase election fraud? It's a big question that a lot of people are asking. It's a fun little article here that I thought did a pretty bang-up job talking about it. But in states that allow absentee mail balloting, the voter writes, calls, or goes online and requests an absentee ballot from their local election authority. In some places, voters need an excuse. Some places they don't. So in other places they don't. So many states are moving to this system, generally referred to as no excuse absentee balloting. In making the request, voters have to provide their name and address. After receipt of the request, local election authorities send a ballot to the voter at the home address and provide one security envelope for the ballot that keeps the vote choice private, and another envelope into which the sealed ballot is placed. The voter signs the outside of the second envelope to certify he or she is the registered voter. Again, couple hoops that you have to go through to do an absentee ballot. And if they want to send these out to everybody, again, I'm fine with that because there's sort of a check and balance. There's at least a secondary aspect to it that makes it harder to cheat. But upon receipt of that mail ballot, local election authorities check the name on the voter to make sure that the person is registered to vote and is casting a ballot from the address registered within the election authority. So again, they double check. There's a check and balance. What are political consequences of mail-in balloting? Well, Republicans fear balloting will increase the votes for Democrats, so they think it's going to have to do with age, right? So they worry that individuals who are part of groups that typically vote in lower numbers will cast absentee ballots because of the ease of doing so. This might include people that are younger, low income, minorities, and those without access to transportation. So Republicans fear that's the case. Yet one group that benefits from absentee ballots is senior citizens, who often skew GOP. So again, these things can go a couple different ways. Now again, up here, when they're talking about how does mail-in balloting work, they're talking about absentee mail-in balloting, not just I'm just going to mass mail this form to millions of people and hope for the best. So that's kind of the discussion around how mail-in balloting works. And again, there's checks and balances. It helps. So they say fraud is rare in U.S. mail-in voting, and here are some methods that prevent it. But what is interesting right here is voting by mail is not new to the United States. Nearly 1 in 4 voters cast in 2016 presidential ballots that way. Now, again, they're going back to that same number. How secure is it? For one thing, voters won't just be selecting presidents. So they're trying to say that it would be really hard for other countries to print these ballots. They're kind of attacking that argument that China's involving themselves or Soros is involving themselves. I think that would be very difficult to do because there's all sorts of very unique, specific locality type things that get on ballots. So there's, thousands and thousands of different kinds of ballots. Not a bad argument. Some 29 states and the District of Columbia allow voters to track their ballots to ensure that they receive, according to the National Conference, state legislation. 14 states and the DC also allows voters to return their ballots by hand if they don't trust the mail. Now, of course, fraud can be a problem, and there's probably been lots of discussions around it. The conservative Heritage Foundation, which has warned of the risk of mail voting, found 14 cases of attempted mail fraud out of roughly 15.5 million ballots cast in Oregon since the state started conducting elections by mail in 1998. Most prominent of these cases involved campaigns, not voters. So North Carolina invalidated the results of the 2018 congressional election after state officials found that a Republican campaign operative had orchestrated a ballot fraud scheme. Again, in my opinion, if it can be taken advantage of by either side, it's probably not a good idea. Does it help turnout? Of course it does. Every time they've done it, it's made a big difference. In Colorado, it's one of the other states, thank you, 77% voting age citizens cast ballots in 2016 presidential election, the highest figure in the country according to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Oregon, that figure was 72%. Washington State, it was 68%, well above the national rate of 63%. So obviously they make it easier and easier for people to do this. Minuscule number of potentially fraudulent ballots in states with universal mail voting undercuts Trump's claims about election risks. Now, 4 of those states are very super blue, and one of them's oddly red, but it's a weird red. It's not even a real red. It's probably purple, if anything, but one thing that's interesting is the Washington Post analysis of data collected by 3 vote-by-mail states with the help from nonprofit Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, found that officials identified just 372 possible cases of double voting or voting on behalf of deceased people out of about 14.6 million votes cast by mail in 2016 and 2018 general elections. Now, something to point out with this particular number, and this is one of the things I kind of want to say, is some of these numbers are based off of this ERIC Foundation, ensuring the efficiency and integrity of America's voter rolls. There's 30 states currently enrolled in ERIC. So it's not all the states, it's not all the elections, it's not all, right? It's a very new organization that's getting more and more people. Now, it does seem to be a bit of a mixture of blue and red and everything in between, but it's not necessarily the best way to look at this data. It's also, they're going after a very subset, possible double voting or voting on behalf of deceased people. 2 very specific things that Trump has talked about. And in the 5 states that just have everybody and their mother voting, I don't know how much it would matter anyway, but they've been doing it for years. And that's not the big problem. That's one thing I want to say. Again, binary arguments back and forth that really aren't the problem. We're going to get to the problem, but this right here, the fact that the wrong people may vote, that's going to happen on both sides. That, again, is not the problem. Let's continue through this. So, Eric, we already talked about that. Now, Trump's made a couple accusations or claims or whatever. One thing that's interesting is claiming the right to issue an executive order to vote by mail. I think he says stuff oftentimes just to upset people. I really do. But from everything I've been able to get my hands on literature-wise, the vote is a state thing, period. So Trump really probably couldn't do an executive order to do it. We're going to have some states that are good, some states that are bad. Now, I want to point out one thing. In the 2016 election, Trump won handedly many of the states across this great union. So just because there's maybe going to be voting by mail in Idaho and some of these other states, they're very likely still going to vote predominantly the way we would expect that to happen. Again, I don't think that's the problem. We'll get into it. Trump's talking about using an executive order, or we'll see. I mean, he might. Again, I'm very into watching the show right now. A lot of very interesting things are going on. This fight is contentious. I'm almost 100% sure they've already got the backup plan and a backup plan to that nailed out, in place, ready to go. I believe this is an issue of, again, letting people play their hands, show their hands. Because, again, everyone on the left is trying to say there's nothing wrong with mail-in voting. It's perfectly awesome. It works every single time. Well, that's not true. We're going to find out here in a second. So Trump is getting pretty hot and heavy and making some demands, for sure. And it sounds like we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. What else we got going on with Trump? Well, he's talking about a lawsuit to block Nevada, their mail-in voting. He is saying because they're going to go to a mail-in voting and the way they're going to do it, it almost guarantees there's never a chance that a Republican will ever win again in that state. Now, could be very true. And again, this is part of that binary argument. And I don't think it's that, I don't think Trump's at fault for playing into it. I think he's playing into it because while people are busy talking about this, while basically the left and right, the cancel culture, the ones that are super loud and boisterous and always yelling, They're going to yell at each other about this. That'll keep them occupied and busy while everybody else starts to handle the real problem, which we'll get to. I know I keep teasing it, but we're working up to it. I'm getting close. Don't worry, it's not far. So what's leading up to some of this? Well, we've got this botched New York City primary has become the November nightmare. This is getting into the true crux of the problem. This right here, we're now starting to taste what the real problem is. And this is not what people are talking about. And this is a concern. So what happened in New York? Well, they did a mail-in ballot in New York. Pretty sure, there we go. And we have a very close race. Mr. Patel trails the incumbent, Representative Carolyn B. Maloney, by some 3,700 votes, though more than 12,000 ballots have been disqualified, including about 1,200 that were missing postmarks, he said. Now, in the case of their postmark, they were sent out, no postage necessary, but somehow that was confusing to the post office, and there was a bunch of them that were rejected because they didn't have stamps. They didn't need to have stamps. Postage was free. Should be known, but they weren't. So a bunch of those, these 1,200 were likely legit. That takes a little swath of that. And then, I don't know, the 12,000 ballots, how many of those were legit? How many of them weren't? He's also talking about asking the federal disqualify ballots. The lawsuit included testimony that election officials had mailed out more than 34,000 ballots on one day before the election. One day before the primary. So they had less than 24 hours to get 34,000 of these ballots. Again, it's the way that they weren't able to deal with this voting. They didn't know how to do it. They're not efficient at it. They're not like Oregon, who's been doing it since 98. Thought it was 2000, but it's 98. It's like 22 years that Oregon's been doing this. If anything, we should probably listen to them. If they weren't so busy burning down Portland, they might actually be useful to talk to right now, but we'll let them worry about putting fires out before they can talk to us about what they've learned through the election by mail concept. And again, they're legit by mail, like not just absentee. No, everything is by mail. So signed, sealed, undelivered, thousands of mail-in ballots rejected for tardiness. Right here, a lot of people that were hanging their own ballots on strings. Now, was there thousands of them? No, but this was New Jersey election. There was a rally out of town hall here. Protesters hung 1,101 absentee ballots that represent the number of votes that weren't counted in a mayoral election that was decided by just 195 votes. The vote was decided by 195 votes. 1,100 absentee ballots never made it. Never made it. This is also part of the problem. This is New Jersey, another election that was maybe stolen. I don't know if the person won or if you would have counted those 1,100 votes, would that have changed it, or would that just, then that would have been, a 900-point difference, right? Instead of 195. I don't know. But these questions are certainly part of the problem from this whole binary argument. So again, okay, we got votes that definitely aren't being counted. Maybe it's small percent. They're saying around 1% in most states. What we've actually found, rejected for arriving late anyways, Virginia's the worst, it seems, at 5.63% of their 67,000 mail-in ballots. 5.63% were rejected because they arrived late. That is a large number of these. What is that? 675 times 5, right? That's like, what? Almost 4,000 people. That's a lot of people that didn't get to voice their vote. Arkansas, 3%. Oklahoma, 3%. Rhode Island, 2.6%. You can see the numbers. Vermont at 1%. Georgia at 0.74%. I've got a really cool little article about Georgia that is another example of the binary argument. And again, we'll get to I think the true argument and what's truly going to happen. But again, Mississippi, 0.16 for arriving late. Out of 21,000 too. It's hardly anything. But there is definitely evidence, there's definitely information to suggest that mail-in voting is not necessarily the panacea that so many of us want it to believe. Errors and fraud at issue as absentee voting rises. So Tallahassee, Florida, this was back in 2012, so it was a while ago, but again, still telling. And again, it's Florida too. Florida, like, if you guys are old enough to remember it was Bush and what's his face? I can't remember, Gore. Right? And the Chad thing, and the half Chads, and the hanging Chads, and they made jewelry from it. It was ridiculous. Florida. Once again, Florida. It's always in Florida. Anyway, In the 2012 presidential election, 35.5 million voters requested absentee ballots, but only 27.9 million absentee votes were counted. According to a study, Charles Stewart III, a political scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, obviously a very smart guy, he's the third of them, he calculated that 3.9 million ballots requested by voters never reached them, that another 2.9 million ballots received by voters did not make it back to the election officials, and that election officials rejected 800,000 ballots. That suggests an overall failure rate of as much as 21%. 21% of a failure rate. Now, I want to call him out a little bit, and again, this isn't helping my argument, if you will, but I want to be honest and I want to be straightforward as much as I can anyways. But he calculated that 3.9 million ballots requested by voters never reached them. That's probably pretty easy to figure out. But that another 2.9 million ballots received by voters did not make it back to election officials. This implies they got lost. This implies 2.9 million ballots got lost. That's probably not even close to true. I don't know how many got lost, but of 2.9 million ballots, I bet you at least 2 million of those just were never filled out and stuck in the mail. Like they just never voted. They might have asked for an absentee vote and maybe just forgot, maybe left town, whatever, just didn't do it. But yes, potentially, we got, 21% of votes did not get counted in Florida at all. New York's mail-in voting deluge fuels uncounted ballots confusion. Now, again, going back to the problem that's going on in New York, they're saying election officials say it'll take them till early August to finish counting a tidal wave of absentee ballots that overwhelmed a system which typically handles only around 5% of the vote. About 1.8 million New Yorkers requested mail-in ballots for New York's primary. Voting ended June 23rd, but the results of many races, including 2 closely watched congressional primaries, are still unknown. June 23rd, we had a vote. Today is August 4th. That's a full month, 6 days, and 4 more days. That's a month and 10 days that we're still waiting to see them count the votes and to know who won. Now we're really getting into the problem. And the problem is we've got 5 states that know how to handle mail by voting. We've got 5 states that every time there's a vote get this deluge of stuff in the mail. The post office in those 5 states probably ramp up their staffing to make sure they can properly sort and deal. And the counting mechanisms and the places that they do the counting are probably somewhat efficient. 22 years they've been doing this. And they're able to work through this. They staff up for it. They know what's coming. They're used to it. 45 other states that are going to go predominantly to vote by mail have no idea what they're doing. Here's one example of a state that should be capable of handling gobs of mail, right? It's New York. Millions of people live there. And 1.8 million people, that's not even close to the half. I mean, that's not even close. That's not even 10% of the voters. 1.8 million New Yorkers requested mail-in ballots, and that was too much. That broke the system. 1.8 million New Yorkers broke their fragile system, and a month and 10 days later, we're still wondering who won the election there. We're starting to see some things play out here that's a little bit scary. Now again, America's hidden voting epidemic, mail ballot failures. According to Commission 2016 report, for example, more mail ballots were misdirected and unaccounted for than the margin of votes between Hillary Clinton and Donald J. Trump. She had 2.9 million more votes, yet 6.5 million ballots were misdirected or unaccounted for by states. She won by 2.9 million, and everyone says she won the popular vote, when nearly double that, actually more than double that, never made it. Unaccounted for, misdirected. Not sure if they mailed them, not sure if they didn't. We don't really know, but that's a lot of question marks that are left hanging over the results. Everyone has claimed that Hillary should be the president because she won 2.9 million more popular vote, even though Donald Trump handedly won by the Electoral College. Handedly. By 75? It was an insanely large number. He just worked her. And so, of these 2.9 million, a lot of questions around how much of that still would be there. after these 6.5 million ballots were found or counted. And who knows? I mean, that part of my brain that doesn't think stuff's always on the up and up figures, hey, maybe they found 6.5 million votes for Trump and they couldn't believe it and they were just shoving these things off to the side. Who knows? But a lot of questions have come into play. Taking into account the 2012, 2014, 2016, and 2018 federal general elections, 28.3 million ballots disappeared after officials gave them to the U.S. Postal Service. There are numerous problems to point fingers at and many explanations as to what happened to these ballots. But the bottom line is simple. Tens of millions of ballots were lost in a mail voting system on a scale not seen in polling places. Polling places are set up to be able to handle volumes, the counting, the whole 9 yards. Been doing that for years and years and years and years. Now, one thing that is kind of funny, there was a story, I don't know which one of the ones where it was New York, and Governor Cuomo, once again, now he's blaming the post office for why it's taking so long in New York. Election officials say it will take them until early August to finish counting a tidal wave of absentee ballots. He's actually blaming, I think it says it down in here somewhere, he's actually blaming the post office. This guy's like just amazing, Cuomo, the way he works. Like it's unreal. Blames everybody outside of himself. It's like, bro, you are in charge of New York. Do you take any responsibility for anything at all in your state? You should. It's always everyone else's fault. Oh, it's amazing how that plays out. So again, our epidemic, 6.5 million ballots misdirected, unaccounted for. So here's the problem with mail-in ballots. They may not be counted. Now here's on the other side of this. And I want to bring this up because I think this is a super important point to consider as well. In a area in Georgia that's predominantly white, pot, kettle, getcha, a disproportionate number of younger voters, people of color, and first-time voters had their mail ballots rejected for those two reasons. We account for a battery of individual level details available in the Georgia voter file in mail ballot data using a two-stage modeling approach. The first stage identifies who is more likely out of all of Georgia's registered voters to cast a mail ballot. The second stage model, who is more likely to cast a mail ballot that is rejected. This approach allows us to account for the fact that voters who chose to cast mail ballots may be different than those who chose to vote in person. Using Georgia's mail ballot data, we also were able to find why the ballot was rejected. So we had a bunch of people of color and younger that had their votes on a large scale, lost, canceled, rejected, whatever. Again, if this can be taken advantage of by either side, in my opinion, it's a bad idea. Just because I may want to see one side win, I don't think cheating is how to get there. Now, do I think the Dems are completely below cheat? Yeah, like they would cheat in a heartbeat. In fact, that's their plan. But their plan is not to cheat so much by the mail balloting. Their plan is to cheat by the fact that this is going to take too long to count these ballots. And what the plan is right now, the best we understand, what the plan is right now is that and Pelosi's already talked about this, that the continuation of government would require that if we have not counted the ballots and been able to announce who the president is by whenever, by probably the end of the year or by the time he's supposed to be sworn in, if it has not happened by that point, their thinking is, and I'm not sure how this is going to play out in real life, we'll see, but this is the plan. But their thinking is since they haven't counted all the votes, and Trump hasn't necessarily won yet, and whoever the heck was supposed to take over, Biden, it's not going to be him, so whoever the heck actually ends up running for the Democrats' side, since they will have not officially won yet, then the power of the presidency would go to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. I guess assuming that she wins and still maintains Speaker of the House. But my guess is if they're going to lag on counting the president's votes, they're most definitely going to lag in counting senators and House of Representative votes. So continuity of government would require Pelosi to become the president. And she would then be in charge and be able to do any sort of crazy stuff she wanted, especially with all the executive order power that exists. And especially the fact that she is as deep a deep state person as deep state gets. That's their plan. That's what they're trying to do. Now, again, Trump and everybody else well aware of what the actual plan is. Is anyone really talking about this? I've heard a couple people. But for the most part, I hear everyone going back and forth about mail-in ballots doesn't work, mail-in ballots does work, mail-in ballots doesn't work, mail-in ballot does work. Not the problem. Guarantee you, mail-in voting is going to be a huge part of this election. How can we make it better? I think that's part of what's on the agenda. How can we guarantee that people are capable of actually counting all this stuff? I think that's on the table. A lot of people are probably trying to figure that out. And I would assume if enough votes are tallied in enough locations to where even by numbers the president still wins, such as Electoral College and maybe the couple states that are taking forever to count their votes, California, a lot of electoral votes there, but California, New York, maybe Pennsylvania, I feel like Michigan had a decent number of votes. These states will take a magically long time. But if all the other states, all the more red states, haven't and have completely tallied their votes, and they turn out the way one might expect, especially with as crazy as stuff is, as much violence is happening in cities around the nation right now, there's a lot of silent majority people that are going to turn out and vote en masse. And if all those cities have the answer before a couple cities don't, or a couple states don't, and there's enough numbers to make sure he's the president, then I'm pretty sure that's what the Supreme Court's going to decide. Because it's ultimately going to come down to the Supreme Court, and we're probably going to have a 5-4 vote, and it's probably going to turn out the way that the patriots are expecting. Stay vigilant. Be looking for information to help share this with others, to help show this to others, to help others understand what's really going on. This isn't so much about mail-in ballots. And again, that term's wishy-washy. Are you talking about absentee ballots, or are you talking about actual just automatic ballots going out to everybody? Very different things. So if someone's been saying that we've been doing absentee or voting by mail for years and years in all sorts of states, well, no, technically 5 states have been doing it for a pretty long time, and the rest of the country has been doing absentee ballot for a very long time. And those are very different things. You have to go through some extra hoops to get that absentee ballot. A lot is going on, and this truly is the time that all of us have been waiting for, have been called for, and essentially have been drafted to. This silent war that is occurring against this silent enemy. And I think we're actually doing rather well, folks. Let's keep up the hard work, keep sharing information, keep supporting as many people as you can, keep sharing, liking, thumbs up, subscribing to channels, myself included. All these things help this movement move. That is very important. If anything, if you can find enough channels that you support and just subscribe to them, watch them as you can, thumbs up when you can, these things will make a difference for those channels. And certainly, I've got a PayPal link below. Any support anybody can offer right now, certainly in this time of where, a lot of people need help themselves. And I appreciate it, and I do this happily, and I hope I'm making a difference. I love you guys. Where we go one, we go all. It's on the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle.